breaking news.
We are continuing to follow breaking news of a guilty verdict for a man accused of killing his girlfriend. A jury convicted Jonathan Burgess for the 2022 shooting that killed 25-year-old Faith Gillikin and critically injured another person.
The jurors found Burgess guilty of first-degree murder, attempted first-degree murder, and other offenses. WECT's J.C. Caldwell went to court, heard the verdict today. What was the reaction in the courtroom to that decision, J.C.?
Yeah, John, well, I watched as Burgess faced a jury, a judge, and Faith Gillikin's family, and he appeared to have no emotion on his face in court when the final guilty verdict was read in the courtroom. And it's been 2 weeks of this trial, listening to 911 calls, seeing evidence, and hearing from over 40 witnesses. Burgess is guilty of killing Faith Gillikin on May 7th, 2022, and critically injuring Nicholas Raspino, who survived the shooting that left him in a wheelchair. Today, the state argued the murder was premeditated, and Burgess had even searched up, quote, gunshot wounds to the head online just an hour before Gillikin was killed. The defense argued witness statements are inconsistent and no blood was ever found on Burgess. After hearing the verdict, though, Gillikin's parents, April and Paul, say they're happy to see justice for their girl.
It was evident. I think everybody knew he was guilty.
I think if she was standing in front of me right now today after this, she would, or I would say to her, we did it, Faith. And I was strong because of you.
Well, Burgess was sentenced to life in prison without parole, and his attorney in court today said that he's going to be appealing that decision to the North Carolina Court of Appeals. Reporting live in Wilmington, J.C. Caldwell, WECT News.